Winter has always been a time for gathering in the longhouse and sharing information around the fire. This is our contribution to that tradition.
I'm Scott Hill with Hill People Gear, and I'm here to talk to you about fire today. The first question that we need to discuss is to build a fire or not. Fires can be extremely beneficial, but they also come at the cost of a lot of labor and time. The benefits that fire bring to the table are twofold. First, an exterior heat source. By that I mean a heat source that you don't generate yourself. It's coming exterior to your body, and you can use it either externally, warming the outside of your body, or internally, hot food and hot drink. Those can either be in a planned situation or unplanned situation. By planned, I mean end of a long day, you have a hot meal, or have a hot meal to get you going, or you're using a wood stove or lean-to with a reflector or something similar to heat your sleeping area, so you're carrying less insulation, or potentially can spend more of the dark hours outside your bag doing things, spending time with your friends, accomplishing little camp chores, that kind of thing. Unplanned, maybe you're in a situation where weather blows in and you don't expect it to do. Maybe it's a norther that blows through and temperature drops 40 degrees on you, and you're not wearing the appropriate clothing or prepared for it, and you need to get some warmth going for your body, or you go through the ice, or there's an injury that's putting you into shock. In any of those situations, having a heat source that's not generated for your body can be an important survival instance. Now, granted, you want to make good decisions all the way along so that if you do get in a situation like that, you're prepared for it. But if you don't, a fire can literally be the difference between life and death. The other thing that fire provides is far more intangible and a little bit harder to quantify, and that's the psychological benefits to fire. It could be as simple as watching your kids roasting marshmallows makes you happy, and that's a big enough reason to build a fire and go through all the work and energy to do it. Or you might be in an isolated incident, and having a fire gives you hope, gets you through the night, gives you something to do. In any event, fire comes at a cost, and that cost is labor and time. The old joke is that a fire warms you 3 times. The first time when you cut the wood, the second time when you stack the wood, and the third time when you burn the wood. Like a lot of old sayings, it gets old, but there's certainly a kernel of truth to it, because when you're building a fire, you have to take into account how long you're going to be burning it for, and make those preparations, because you want to have not just wood to get the fire going, but wood to sustain the fire. My personal rule of thumb is I want as much wood as I'm expecting to burn with a comfortable margin for the entire time I plan on having a fire. Now, in this situation, since I'm just doing a demo, you can see I have a relatively small amount of wood, and I would be amazed if I even go through this. But if I'm in a situation where I'm going to be running a fire for a few hours, or even over the weekend in a wood stove in the evenings and mornings, I'm going to need a considerable amount of wood. And at some point, I'm going to have to put the energy and time into preparing that wood, either hauling it in, cutting it down, splitting it, stacking it. At some point, I'm going to have to lay out that energy. Now, if all I'm looking for is a hot drink and warm food, I'm probably better off using a small stove, like a Trangia or Pocket Rocket or something like that, because it's a little bit of weight to carry, and I can very quickly prepare that hot food or hot drink and get it on board without having to expend that energy. On the other hand, if I want to heat my shelter for the weekend, obviously can't get by with just a little stove, so I'm going to have to make other accommodations. So that's kind of the risk balance ratio. Do I need a fire? Is it worth building a fire? And when am I going to use that energy and time to prepare to build this fire? Now, on most trips, you're going to do that at the time during the trip. It's not something you're going to go out in advance and do. But if you're running a trap line, or know you're going to a certain place in the winter, you can make an earlier trip out. You can do a trip just to prepare wood, and that might be the right thing to do, so that when you're out there with your friends, you're not using up that time. The other aspect to a fire is danger. The most obvious one being burns, especially if you're around toddlers and dogs and children and adults that should know better. Burns happen pretty easily, pretty quickly, and you got to be aware that if you choose to have a fire, that's a situation that you might have to deal with, and you need to have what you need to deal with that, both the training and stuff. The other thing is preparing wood. You're going to be using tools. Tools can injure you. They're sharp, they're meant for cutting, and if you're not careful, they'll cut you. So again, beneficial, but there's things to watch for. The safety aspects, not only while it's burning, but while you're preparing your wood, and then simply, is it worth the time and effort to build a fire? Okay, all that being said, when it comes time to build a fire, really what I'm looking for is energy efficiency and time efficiency. I want to get that fire going quickly, and I want to do it with a minimal amount of fuss as I can. Two reasons for that. One, I might be in a situation where I need that fire rather quickly, and I don't want to spend a lot of time getting it going. Or two, I might simply have other tasks that I need to accomplish, and the longer I spend messing with fire, the longer it is I'm not doing that other stuff. So with that in mind, I've kind of evolved a 3-tier strategy for my tinder. Tinder being what I use to get that initial ignition. This pretty typical for what I have in packs, pretty typical for what I carry in my kit bag, and it has the first 2 tiers of my fire system. First tier is simply, if I can get any out of here, is simply 1-inch squares of bicycle inner tube. For me, it's a waste material. I'm a mountain biker, and when I eventually get a tube that goes flat, I hang it on the wall, and at this point I have a lifetime supply of fire starter right there on the wall, and other uses for it, but in essence it's turning a trash material into something I can use to light a fire. Now, I'll tell you right now, you're not going to get it going with any kind of flint or steel. You do need a Bic lighter. And the vast majority of the time when I'm starting a fire, I'm using a lighter because it's quick and easy. I can get this going, I can put it where I want it, and it gets my fire going. These are light. I have one in my pocket right now. I carry one in my kit bag, and I've got a couple others in my pack. They're mere ounces for a lot of starts, and worst case scenario, if I do use all the fluid, I still have a flint striker in it. So that's my first line of fire starting tinder, and really this is what I use probably 95% of the time because it gets the fire going. This 1-inch square gives me 2 to 3 minutes of burning, and if I've done a good job with my fire prep, which I'll get to here in a little bit, that's really all I need for that ignition source. Now, that being said, if I'm in a situation where I'm dealing with wet wood, maybe I do need to use a flint and steel for my strike, some other situation where the bicycle inner tube didn't work, I step up to Fast Fire by Sokoa products. Now, our buddy over at Sokoa, Bart Combs and Judson and that crew, they've got a whole spiel that they'll give you on how well this works. And Backpacker Magazine did name it Tinder of the Year. I think it was last year. But basically what you're looking at is a cube of tinder. As I said, you can light it with a lighter. If you shave it up a little bit with with your knife or something, you can light it very easily with flint. This cube here burns 12 to 15 minutes. You can get it wet and it still burns. As I said, Bart's got a whole spiel with it. What I like about it is not only does it catch very quickly, but I can choose to use this entire block to get my fire going, or I can cut off just a little piece if I think that's all the more I need. And then the coolest part, this is for you, Bart, I can put it out and reuse it. So it's a renewable resource. If I had used just a quarter block, I could have let it burn through. But in this case, if I'm out on a single trip, my fire is going, I put it out, and I put it right back in its package, and I can use it again later to start a fire. Now, this does have a shelf life. You're not going to leave this package open for weeks on end, months on end, and it's still going to light as quickly, as easily as possible. But for a weekend, you're probably going to be good. So that's my second tier of tinder. Fast Fire from Sokoa. My third tier is something called Uber Fire. And to be honest, I don't think of this so much as tinder, but as fire in a can. This was developed by Dale Fruit. Basically, you have some quick start tinder in there, which is a cotton ball type material, and then a proprietary stuff in there. And he makes them in different sizes. The different sizes have different burn rates. The burn rates can be extended drastically if you keep stirring them up, introducing oxygen. I'll explain later why that's important. But what this does is gives me time. If I'm in a situation where I've got to warm my hands, my wood is very wet and I need to get it going, or simply I may just be exhausted and need a minute of heat to collect what I'm doing, I've got a fire in my can here, and it'll burn for a while. And if I just stir it a little bit with a stick, it'll burn even longer. So I carry a small one in my kit bag, I carry this side in my pack, and then I have it in my Jeep too, because this gives me time. It's fire in a can. And that's really it. You know, I've used cotton balls over the years, I've used all kinds of different things over the years, but this is really where I've ended up, because 90% of the time or 95% of the time I get it going with my 1-inch cube, and from there I have options that give me more time. 12 to 15 minutes. I want to say this is half an hour to over an hour if you're stirring it, which, if you think about it, is quite a long time to get a fire going and a lot of concentrated heat. So why is that important? Why am I focusing on these different burn times? Well, that's the way that fire works. Most people think, and I thought this for a number of years, that what is burning is the wood. And while that's kind of true, it's not really the whole truth. The whole truth is what is burning is actually the gases given off by the wood, or gases given off by the rubber, fast fire, Uber Fire, whatever it is. That gas is what's actually combusting. And whatever material you're trying to burn, in this case wood, has a certain gasification point, a certain point where it gets hot enough that it starts releasing those gases, and then the gases can start burning. Now, if your fuel's really wet, it's going to take longer for it to heat up to the point where it gasifies, or if it's really cold outside. And that's why I have these different time periods that allow me to heat the wood to get it to the point where it's going to start gasifying and burning on its own. So that's why I have 3 tiers. Quick fire, taking me a little longer, and I'm in a situation where I might have to really take a while getting that fire dried out, or getting me dried out, and then getting that fire going because the wood's wet. That's why I have 3 tiers. That's why they each have different time periods that work for me. From there, I want to talk about kindling. Kindling being the wood that I start burning, and I use really kind of 2 main different kinds of kindling. One is squaw wood. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about when I say squaw wood. Squaw wood is the dead and dying branches lower down on a tree. The nice thing about it is, since it's up off the ground, it dries out really quickly. You can see that this is pretty dry because I got a nice snap when I do it. I can look at it and see there's not a lot of moisture in it. Squaw wood is predominantly on evergreens. This happens to be a juniper. Trees like aspens that are self-pruning drop their branches off, less likely to have squaw wood, but this is a phenomenal source of good firewood, and not just firewood but tinder. All these little end branches typically stay pretty dry or dry out very quickly, and they catch fire very quickly. So when you're looking for squaw wood, go find a tree, find the lower branches, see if they've got anything growing on them, and then do a snap test. This real little stuff is actually bending pretty good before it snaps, which means it's got a lot of moisture in it. When I move up to slightly larger stuff, you'll see it has a nice snap like a toothpick. That's what you're looking for. the second kind of kindling that I use is just splits from larger wood, meaning that I keep splitting it down until I get it to the size that I want. And just like I talked about with the squaw wood, test it. How easily does it snap? Does it feel moist to you? This is pretty good wood. It got snowed on, I guess it's been last weekend, so about 5 days ago. So it's got a little bit of moisture in it, but it is dry enough that I think it'll give me a pretty good start. Now a little bit about wood and wetness. The Forest Service and BLM, Wildland Firefighting, classifies fuels by how long in hours it takes to get completely saturated or dry out. Why that's important is because, again, we've got to get this wood hot enough to gasify. And typically rounds, whether it be the little rounds or the big rounds, soak in from the outside and dry from the inside. Mean that the driest wood inside is going to be the inside. This here is going to be drier than this here typically, and that's why you want to get these splits and get to the interior. So earlier I mentioned wood prep, and I don't mean just gathering enough wood to get the fire going or keep it burning. I mean actually preparing your different sizes of wood. The best analogy that I've come up with for fire is it's kind of like a baby. When it's born, it needs constant attention, feeding, and you can't really leave it. As it gets older, you can start giving it less attention until you finally get to the point where you've got a nice bed of coals and you just keep adding wood. But in that intervening period, once you get it going to where you can afford to walk away, you need to be prepared to add fire, wood, fuel as it's needed. So you want not only your tinder prepped, but you want your various sizes. For instance, I have tinder slightly larger, going up from there, going up from there, going up, and going all the way up to my biggest size here. I want all those different sizes ready, and this is the biggest mistake that I see for people once they have fire going is if they haven't prepped these different sizes, they either try and jump too fast from really small stuff and throw something big on there and it's simply not hot enough to get this gasified yet and burning, or they have to try and process those smaller pieces of wood, and in the process their fire goes out because it's not getting the attention it needs. So when you process your wood, you want to be ready to go up and down in size all the way from your tinder up to your largest pieces of wood. That's part of the wood prep and part of the time and effort that you need to put in so that once you get that fire going, you can actually get it to the point where it's usable. Now, if you're just heating food, water, that kind of stuff, and going to do a very short burn, you may not need to process big stuff. It may be all kindling size or a little bit bigger, up to thumb size. But if you're going to have a fire for any significant amount of time, you need to make sure that you've got all those steps in between covered like I've gotten here. And then the other thing is you want them handy. Normally I don't build fires up on top of a rock at waist height, but this is kind of a little easier to show you what I've got going on. But when I'm sitting next to the fire, I want to be in a comfortable position. I want to be able to easily lay hand on all these different sides of wood so I don't have to get up and leave that fire. I can constantly be tending it. Now, why do I need to constantly be tending it? As fire burns, your fuel is going to shift. As it's consumed, it's going to change shape, it's going to fall in on itself. And one of the critical things that fire needs in order to do what it does is oxygen. And this is the other most common reason that I see somebody's fire fail, is it smothers itself. Either through them throwing a bunch of wood on and not making sure that it's got a good oxygen in there, or through trying to put not paying attention to if it falls. So you always want to be watching that fire when you first get it going to make sure that you've got enough oxygen in there. And as you see, I've kind of done a two-tier here. Let me explain real quick what I've got going on. This is the actual fire I'm going to be building here, and this is kind of a larger diorama so you can see a little bit easier than trying to see this little thing. As you can see in both cases, I don't have a solid band of wood. I don't have kind of a roof on it, I've got plenty of oxygen in there, and I want to always make sure as I'm placing more wood on there that I'm reintroducing that oxygen. And that's crucial for a fire to burn, and part of why you need to keep attending it. Not only putting the right size fuel on there, but making sure that enough oxygen is still getting in there to burn. From there, really what I want to talk about, and this is kind of the last component, is your fire lay, meaning how you place your wood. I've used a lot of different lays over the years, log cabin, teepees, all those different things. And really kind of what I've gone to for the most part is a lean-to. And there's a few different ways, a few different reasons for that. Again, I've got a small lean-to here, and then I've got a larger lean-to here. In both cases, I'm using what's called a hearth board. I wanted to throw that in as an example of if you're on snow, wet dirt, anything like that. A hearth board is going to act as a dry place to start your fire, but also, and this is the main reason I like a lean-to, it's going to be a reflector. Remember earlier I talked about how wood has to heat to a certain level to gasify, to give off that gas to start burning? Well, in this case, both my hearth board and my lean-to board here that I'm using for a lean-to is going to reflect that heat back into that wood and give me another burn. The final reason I really have gone to a lean-to is it's sturdy. I've got a nice sturdy base here to keep adding wood to, same down here, so I can keep adding wood on there without it really collapsing on me. In this case, I can go up a size and add that, and I've got that nice bridge there where it's not going to collapse in on itself and smother out whatever coals or fire I do have burning. So that's really, in a nutshell, why I like the lean-to. It gives me reflector, which is going to concentrate my heat on there and make it more quickly gasified, and also it's going to give me a nice sturdy base to work from. Finally, if you're having issues with your wind blowing in, it can be a wind block too. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, how I get the fire going. Since I already opened my fast fire, I'm going to jump straight to it instead of using a piece of wood. And what I'm going to actually do here is break off a chunk. Got some smaller pieces here I'm going to kind of set on top. So again, you don't have to use the whole block. And again, this is one of the problems with working up in the air, is you're more likely to have wind issues. But in this case, I'm simply going to slide my fast fire underneath there. And this is kind of collapsing on me, but you can see that I've still got my lean-to going here. Again, typically not building on a rock, having it up in the air, but you can see how that's burning up through there. And it's actually, this is pretty good dry wood. So at that point, see how that kind of started putting off more smoke as I put that on top there? That's an example of maybe adding too quickly, smothering it. If I keep doing like this, it's going to smother it even more. I don't want to do that. So you want to pull it back off and make sure all that's burning well. And then if I do add wood, make sure that I've got that nice oxygen in there so more oxygen can get in there. And just keep feeding it. I'm in the baby stages here where it needs more attention. So again, I've added a nice amount of wood. I'm already laddering up. I'm already putting my thicker fuels on there, heavier fuels, and have a nice dandy fire going. And then from there, of course, I would go to my next bigger stuff. But just showing you, build it on nice ground instead of something sloped like here. Build that lean-to, make sure you're laddering up, make sure you've prepped all your different wood sizes so that you can just keep adding the wood as you need to, and have your different levels of Tinder there. Different levels of Tinder so you can get your fire going easily. And that's it. That's kind of in a nutshell I'm gonna pull all this away because I don't need to burn this wood for a long time. And I don't know if you can see this, but I'm actually already starting to get burning both on my hearth board and on the board that I'm using for lean-to, because that heat's concentrated right there in that kind of V. And you can see where the wind's whipping it just a little bit coming over the top of this rock. And from here, it's just a matter of keeping it alive and keep fussing with it until it's old enough to be on its own. Thank you.